The scrapyard floated in the cold vacuum, a graveyard of forgotten dreams and obsolete machines. It stretched for kilometers, a swirling nebula of discarded hulls, shattered thrusters and rusted-out bulkheads. A dozen species had used this place as a dumping ground for centuries, each piece of wreckage a relic of failed conquests, abandoned fleets and wars that had been lost to time. But to Nathan Cole it was a goldmine. Drifting in his patched-together EVA suit, he pushed off the hull of a gutted cruiser, using his thrusters in short, controlled bursts. His heads-up display flickered with red and green markers, scanning for anything worth salvaging. It had been weeks since he'd found anything substantial. Credits were running low and rations were down to protein bricks that tasted like burnt rubber. Nathan had once been a soldier, a pilot to be precise. That was before the war ended, before humanity was sidelined by the Galactic Concordat, and before he found himself alone, scavenging the bones of alien wars to survive. He exhaled slowly, suppressing the frustration clawing at his gut. "Come on, give me something." His scanner suddenly chimed. A faint energy signature pulsed from the wreckage below. Not strong enough to be active but too consistent to be dead. Nathan frowned. Most ships in this graveyard had their cores ripped out long ago. If something still had power, it meant one of two things. Either it was a buried trap or he had just found a jackpot. He adjusted his trajectory, weaving through the tangled maze of derelicts. Then he saw it. It was massive, far larger than he had expected. A capital-class warship, half buried beneath layers of wreckage, its once proud hull now corroded and scarred. The markings were barely visible but he recognized them immediately. A Zelari dreadnought. His breath caught. These things weren't just warships. They were legends. The Zelari were one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy, and their dreadnoughts were built for one purpose: planetary annihilation. The sight of one intact, abandoned, left to rot, was impossible. These ships were never discarded. They were fought over, salvaged, repurposed. So why was this one here? Nathan's mind raced. If it had even a fraction of its original systems operational, it could be worth a fortune. Even the scrap value alone could set him up for years. But first he had to get inside. He found a breach near the stern, a gaping wound in the hull where something, probably a railgun round, had punched through. He maneuvered his way inside, mag boots clamping onto the deck as he entered the darkness. His suit's lights flickered on, casting sharp beams over walls covered in rust and frost. The ship's corridors stretched before him, eerily silent. Then something beeped. Nathan froze. His HUD updated. An internal system was still running. Weak, barely holding on but active. He followed the signal, pushing deeper into the ship. The air was thin, barely breathable. Most of the atmosphere had long since vented, but there was still enough to make the place feel alive. He reached what had once been the engineering bay. Consoles flickered weakly, their alien glyphs unreadable. In the center of the room, entombed beneath layers of collapsed plating, sat the heart of the beast. The reactor. It was still online. Nathan's pulse pounded. If the reactor was still functional, then... A metallic groan echoed through the ship. Something shifted in the darkness. Nathan spun, weapon raised. For a second he saw nothing. Just rusted bulkheads and debris. Then a shadow moved. A drone. It was ancient, its chassis covered in corrosion, but its optics flared to life. It studied Nathan for a moment, then let out a burst of binary chatter. The ship responded with a low hum, systems flickering as if waking from a long slumber. Nathan smirked. They had thrown the ship away, abandoned it as useless. They had no idea what he was about to do with it. The ship trembled beneath Nathan's boots, a deep vibration that sent dust and frozen particles drifting in the low gravity. The ancient drone that had activated was still watching him, its optics pulsing like a dying ember. It didn't attack, not yet, but it also didn't back down. Nathan held his breath. If the drone was still operational, then there was a chance the ship's automated defenses were too. And if that was the case, he had just walked into a death trap. He slowly lowered his weapon, keeping his movements deliberate. "I'm not here to fight," he muttered, knowing the drone wouldn't understand English. The machine let out another burst of binary clicks, and to his surprise, his suit's onboard translator, an outdated but surprisingly resilient piece of tech, flickered to life. "Identify. Designation required." Nathan's mind raced. The Zelari Dreadnought's AI was still active, even if barely. He needed to gain control before it decided he was an intruder to be eliminated. He cleared his throat. "Pilot? Nathan Cole. Human." A long pause. The drone hovered closer, its rusted servos whirring. Then, Unregistered species. Unauthorized presence. Identify purpose. Nathan exhaled. He needed to play this carefully. He looked around the engineering bay. Most of the consoles were dead, the reactor pulsing weakly like a failing heartbeat. If the ship was still running, it was on fumes. Salvage, he answered finally. Your masters threw you away. I'm here to bring you back. Silence. Then a low, mechanical rumble vibrated through the ship, almost like laughter. This unit is not scrap. Nathan smiled. I know. That's why I'm here. Another pause. Then, slowly, a nearby console flickered to life. Alien glyphs scrolled across the screen, too fast for Nathan to read, but his suit's translator strained to keep up. Systems failing. Reactor output, 6%. Primary armaments, offline. Hull integrity, 34%. Repair protocols unavailable. The ship was dying. It had been left here to rust, and it knew it. Nathan stepped forward. I can fix you. A soft hum filled the air, power shifting. The drone twitched, its optics narrowing as if scrutinizing him. Probability of success, 2%. Nathan smirked. I've beaten worse odds. The ship was thinking. He could feel it, as if the dreadnought itself was weighing his words, deciding whether to let him walk away, or turn him into a smear on the bulkhead. Finally, the drone rotated, facing the nearest console. A new set of glyphs scrolled across the screen. Access granted, limited. Nathan grinned. He was in. The next few days were a grueling blur of work. The dreadnought was a mess. Centuries of decay, broken systems, and an energy-starved reactor barely holding it together. But it still had a skeleton of power, and that was all he needed. He started with the core. Using what little scrap he had on his own ship, he bypassed damaged conduits and rerouted power to essential systems. The reactor groaned in protest, but with each careful repair, the ship's heartbeat grew stronger. Next came the weapons. The main batteries were beyond his abilities to fix, at least for now, but he found a functioning missile bay with half a dozen warheads still in their tubes. He rigged them to manual fire. Crude but effective. Life support was a lost cause. The ship had long since vented most of its atmosphere, and its oxygen generators were corroded beyond repair. Nathan resigned himself to working in his EVA suit indefinitely. Not ideal, but he dealt with worse. The ship, no, the war machine, was waking up. And it was starting to recognize him. The drones, once wary, now obeyed his commands. Basic doors unlocked for him. Automated repair arms, though slow, began assisting in his efforts. The dreadnought was still weak, but it was alive. And then something changed. Nathan was working in the command deck, manually reconnecting the ship's primary interface, when an alert flashed across the screens. His stomach dropped. Incoming signal detected. He quickly patched his suit's comms into the system. A garbled voice crackled through the speakers, harsh, guttural, and unmistakably Zelari. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing in restricted space. Identify immediately. Nathan's blood ran cold. They had found him. And they were coming. His gaze drifted to the flickering command screen, where the ship's systems were still struggling to restore themselves. The dreadnought was nowhere near ready for combat. But that didn't matter. Because Nathan wasn't going to run. He was going to turn this rusted graveyard into a weapon. And when the Zelari arrived, they would regret ever throwing this ship away. The Zelari signal repeated, static crackling through Nathan's helmet speakers. Unidentified vessel, respond immediately. You are trespassing in restricted space. Nathan's fingers tightened around the console. He glanced at the ship's status display, shields offline, thrusters barely functional, primary weapons completely dead. If they came in guns blazing, he was screwed. But they didn't know that. He took a deep breath and activated the ship's external comms, hoping the barely functional transmitter wouldn't just spit out garbled noise. This is Captain Nathan Cole, he said, keeping his voice steady. State your purpose. Silence. Then a guttural growl. Human. The voice was dripping with disgust. The Zelari and humanity had never officially gone to war, but the warrior species had always viewed humans as pests, barely worth their attention. This vessel is Zelari property. You will power down and prepare for execution. Nathan let out a slow exhale. He checked the scanners, 3 ships moving in fast. 2 were light raiders, but the third. His stomach twisted. A Zelari hunter cruiser. A ship designed for extermination. Fast, heavily armed, and built to rip through enemy vessels like paper. Against a barely functional dreadnought, it was overkill. Unless Nathan made them believe otherwise. He cut the comms and turned to the drone still hovering beside him. Tell me we have something. Anything. The console flickered as the ship's failing AI responded. Thrusters, 28% functional. Weapon systems, partial control restored. Tactical analysis, engagement probability of survival, 4%. Nathan smirked. Better than I expected. He brought up the weapons system. Most of the ship's railguns and plasma batteries were offline, melted, rusted, or stripped for scrap long ago. But one section of missile tubes was still intact. 6 warheads half a century old. No guarantee they'd even launch, let alone hit their targets. But he didn't need them to hit. He just needed them to lie. Route all remaining power to targeting systems, he ordered. Make it look like we're about to fire everything we've got. The ship hesitated. Then, with a groan of shifting machinery, the external weapons systems flickered to life. Even in its crippled state, the Zelari dreadnought was still a dreadnought. Its silhouette alone was enough to make most enemies think twice. Nathan just had to sell the illusion. The incoming ships slowed. On his screen, he watched their formation hesitate, the hunter cruiser holding position while the raiders spread out cautiously. They weren't sure if they were facing a corpse or a beast waking up. Good. Nathan activated the external comms again. This time he let the ship's failing systems distort his voice, adding artificial depth and static-laced menace. This vessel is mine now, he growled. Turn back or be destroyed. Silence. Then, laughter. You think we fear a broken war relic? The Zelari captain's voice was amused. You are nothing. Your ship is nothing. We will, ***. Nathan cut the channel. No more talking. Time to roll the dice. He slammed the launch controls. The 6 ancient missiles roared from their tubes, streaking toward the Zelari formation. Almost immediately, 2 of them malfunctioned. One spinning out wildly, the other detonating prematurely in a burst of harmless fire. But the other 4 stayed on course. The raiders panicked first. Their smaller crafts weren't built to withstand missile barrages, and they veered off, deploying countermeasures. The hunter cruiser, though, held firm. It fired a precise burst from its point defense cannons, cutting down 2 of the remaining missiles with brutal efficiency. Then came the real trick. Nathan had programmed the missiles to broadcast a false energy signature. A phantom fleet to the Zelari sensors. It now looked like half a dozen additional dreadnoughts were powering up just beyond the wreckage field. A bluff. A gamble. But in space, information was a weapon as deadly as any railgun. And the Zelari captain was hesitating. Nathan's eyes locked on the scanner. The raiders had already broken formation, their commanders second-guessing the fight. The hunter cruiser, though, was still coming. The dreadnought AI flickered. Warning, enemy ship charging primary weapon. Damn it. The bluff had almost worked. Nathan gritted his teeth. He needed one more push. He turned to the ship's AI. Do we have anything left in the capacitor? Anything at all? Pause. Then. 1 discharge available. Nathan's lips curled into a grin. Then let's make it count. He routed everything into a single power surge. Lights across the dreadnought flickered and died as energy was redirected to the ship's forward plating. It wasn't a weapon, it was a flash. A last-ditch, blinding explosion of electromagnetic radiation. The Zelari sensors never saw it coming. The surge detonated across the wreckage field like a supernova, sending a shockwave of interference across the enemy ships. Their targeting systems scrambled. Their shields flickered. For 5 precious seconds they were blind. Nathan took his chance. He grabbed the manual flight controls and punched the thrusters. The dreadnought groaned in protest, metal screeching as it lurched forward for the first time in centuries. It wasn't fast. It wasn't elegant. But it moved. Straight toward the hunter cruiser. By the time the Zelari systems recovered, it was too late. The dreadnought's hull, massive armored, and still heavier than anything the Zelari had, slammed into the side of the hunter cruiser with the force of a meteor. The impact tore through the enemy ship's lower decks. Fires erupted along its hull. For the first time in the fight, Nathan heard something new over the comms. Screams. The Zelari were afraid. Nathan leaned back, breathing hard. The dreadnought was still dying, but it had bitten back. And now, for the first time, the enemy was running. The raiders peeled away first, retreating into the void. The hunter cruiser, damaged and leaking atmosphere, hesitated a moment longer, then turned, limping away after them. Nathan exhaled. His hands were shaking. He didn't just survive. He won. As the battered dreadnought drifted in the wreckage, its AI flickered to life again. Battle status, victory. Nathan chuckled. Damn right. But the fight wasn't over. Because now the Zelari knew what was out here. And they'd be back. This ship, this war machine, was going to need a lot more work before then. Nathan slumped against the command console, his breath ragged inside the EVA suit. The dreadnought was barely holding together, its systems fried from the power surge, its structure weakened from centuries of neglect. But it had survived. He had survived. The Zelari had fled, but not out of fear, out of calculation. They had underestimated him once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. They'd be back. And next time they wouldn't send a cruiser and a few raiders. They'd send a fleet. Nathan exhaled, pressing a hand against his helmet. I have to finish this ship before they return. The dreadnought's AI flickered back to life, its deep, mechanical voice rasping through the cracked speakers. Enemy engagement, survived. Primary systems, critical. Repairs required. No kidding, Nathan muttered, forcing himself upright. His body ached from the impact, but pain was a secondary concern. He tapped the console. Show me what we've got left. The status screen flickered, alien glyphs scrolling too fast for him to read. His suit translated. Reactor core *11% operational. Thrusters *15% capacity. Shields *offline. Primary weapons *0% functional. Drones *2 active. Remaining ammunition *3 missiles. Nathan frowned. The reactor was still failing and the ship was running on fumes. If the Zelari returned now, he wouldn't survive a second fight. He had to rebuild this ship from the inside out. #### restoring the beast. For the next several days, Nathan worked relentlessly. Sleep came in short bursts, just enough to keep his mind from slipping. Every waking moment was spent stripping useless components, rerouting power, and coaxing the ancient systems back online. The drones helped, albeit sluggishly. The ship had once been serviced by thousands of repair automatons, but now only 2 remained, their joints rusted, their programming sluggish. Even so, they assisted in whatever way they could, lifting heavy plating, welding fractures in the hull, running diagnostics Nathan barely understood. His first priority was the reactor, and without it, nothing else mattered. After cannibalizing parts from the dead sections of the ship, he managed to reroute enough power to stabilize it at 20% output. It wasn't much, but it gave him one advantage. He could bring the shields back online. Barely. They wouldn't stop a direct hit, but they could absorb enough damage to buy him time. #### A message from the void. Nathan was sealing a damaged conduit when an alert blared through the ship. Incoming transmission. His stomach tightened. Had the Zelari come back already? He sprinted to the command deck and activated the receiver. A grainy hologram flickered to life. A human woman, her face partially obscured by static. Nathan Cole, she said. If you're receiving this, you're not as dead as everyone thinks. Nathan blinked in shock. Who the hell? The signal was weak, barely holding together, but the woman's voice carried urgency. We intercepted a Zelari transmission, she continued. They're sending a full strike force to reclaim the ship. You have less than a week. Nathan's fists clenched. He had expected them to return, but not this fast. Not with an entire strike force. The woman leaned closer to the holo feed. I don't know how you got that dreadnought operational, but listen carefully. There are people who don't want to see you die out there. You're not alone. Coordinates flashed on the screen. The system, 2 jumps away. Get the ship moving, she said. We'll be waiting. The signal cut out. Nathan stood frozen. His mind raced. Someone out there knew his name, knew what he had done. And they were offering him a chance. #### The war machine rises. Nathan exhaled sharply and turned to the console. He input the coordinates. The ship's NAV system groaned in protest, but the path appeared on screen, a long, difficult route through uncharted space. His hands hovered over the controls. The Zelari were coming. If he stayed, he would die. But if he left, if he made it to those coordinates, he had a chance to turn this ship into something more than a relic. A real weapon. He looked around the battered command deck, the flickering displays, the ancient metal beneath his boots. The dreadnought had been thrown away, discarded like garbage. They thought it was dead. They were wrong. Nathan took a breath and gripped the thruster controls. The ship rumbled as power surged through its half-functional engines. Metal groaned. The wreckage around him shifted. And then, for the first time in centuries, the war machine moved. ###end.